Sure.
And before being the Chief Resilience Officer, Russ, for 10 years, was our Ward 4 representative on the District Council Board, not District, but City Council. And 3 years of that time, he was also the president of it. So he's got quite an extensive background with district councils and how the city operates. So he's here as well as a sustainability coordinator and a dilatory. And I stole this from, I think, your LinkedIn. If you don't mind, I'll just introduce you as you are a sustainability professional with 10 years of experience driving positive environmental and social impact. I worked with the city and the DNR to develop sustainable strategies to reduce carbon footprint and conserve resources. What'd I do?
Great.
If I did wrong, it's probably what you
Yeah, I know.
All right, well, I will turn it over then to both of you to talk about the action dashboard.
That sounds good. We are glad to join you tonight. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks for the introduction and the invitation tonight. So I'm going to give just a little overview of the city's climate action work as it currently stands for about the first 10-12 minutes. And then I'm going to hand it over to Anna to actually walk you through the dashboard a bit, kind of show you around the dashboard and how we're using it and what we're hoping it's going to be really useful for. So share my screen here. Okay, are you all seeing this? Super. Okay, so the city's climate action resilience plan dates back to 2019 now. It was adopted by City Council at the end of that year. We're already up for a plan update next year, as it will be 5 years old next year, which is hard for me to believe. Time flies when you're having fun. I probably don't need to go through this, but we all know that climate change is, worsening by the year. The most recent International Panel on Climate Change of the UN has indicated that we will probably hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that we've all been trying to avoid, or should have been by sometime early next decade. There's some evidence that we may have already hit that mark seasonally this summer for the first time ever. And significant impacts are expected at that level of global warming. There's this idea of an overshoot period that they warn about of impacts, even if we are to, significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions quickly, some of that change is locked in because of the emissions that are already out there in the atmosphere. And the projection is that we might hit 2 degrees Celsius increase by sometime in the 2060s. And that's sort of that secondary threshold that folks have identified as like another one that we definitely shouldn't cross. Luckily, there's kind of generational change federal legislation in the Inflation Reduction Act that was, of course, passed last year. Last year, I lose track of time. Anyway, we are tracking really closely all of the programs that emerged out of the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But as someone who's been working in sustainability for most of my career, it is really a game-changing opportunity. The funding out of the Inflation Reduction Act goes into a bunch of different places. The bulk of it is really just carrots and credits that make clean energy and the clean energy transition profitable and more financially advantageous for almost everyone. And so you can see kind of the breakdown. I won't talk about this in detail, but it's a combination of focusing on energy supply and then tax credits and rebates and related things for both businesses and individuals and families. Tons of programs coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act through a number of different federal departments, actually. The EPA, Department of Energy, HUD, among others. Each one of these programs has some sub-programs where they're putting out opportunities for competitive grant making. The one exception, the one place where the city is getting a direct allocation of funds is this, what they call EECBG up here in the upper right. The city's getting about $317,000 allocated from the Department of Energy as a lump sum, pretty flexible in terms of how we can put those dollars to use. And I'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to do that. Some other programs, Department of Transportation, Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service with the forestry program, and then all sorts of tax incentives. These slides are going to have a lot of information on them, and I've got just a bunch of stuff here. So I'm going to breeze through it a bit, but we can come back to questions if you have them later. So far, among these various programs, the city's been either directly awarded or a partner in some pretty substantial federal awards. A $1.44 million Department of Energy grant for the expansion of our EV spot network and EV car share program. $2 million for the urban and community forestry program. That sits alongside a bigger grant of $10 million that Great River Greening, one of our nonprofit partners, received through the same program to work both in St. Paul and 3 other communities. The city partnered with the nonprofit Reconnect Rondo to go after a Reconnecting Communities grant program to advance their work and vision for the Rondo community, including a potential future land bridge over 94. And then several pending as well, charging and fueling infrastructure, something called the Buildings Up Challenge, a big $16 million application for a program called Safe Streets for All, where we, led by Public Works, applied for a roadway safety project that would be a bunch of safety improvements on some of the collectors and arterials on the east side, primarily Payne-Phelan, and that location was selected through a citywide transportation safety action plan that identified that as one of the main hotspots for crashes and safety in the city. And then city is not a partner directly in this, but our folks at Reconnect Rondo and the Rondo Community Land Trust are just applying now, or maybe that went in a few days ago, for $100 million in the second round of the Reconnecting Communities program that they've now paired with another program called Neighborhood Access and Equity. I expect you all to memorize all those names and acronyms, and there'll be a quiz at the end. We're tracking the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which is EPA, grant sizes of $200 to $500 million. Those are due in April, as well as a big Solar for All program at the EPA, where our friends at the State Department of Commerce Energy Office are in the process of applying for $100 million that would then be spread around the state. Solar for All is focused on households at 80% of area median income and less getting better access to opportunities for solar, be that their own rooftops or community solar garden subscriptions, etc. Okay, backing up, I love kind of looking at this map that comes out of our Climate Action Resilience Plan, because it gives you a good sense of, from a sort of climate vulnerability perspective, the geography of the city and which parts of the city are most susceptible to the ways in which our climate is changing here in St. Paul. This map takes into account socioeconomic factors, the urban heat island, flooding, tree canopy, and exposure to air pollution, and combines those into sort of a composite vulnerability. This work was actually done by Ramsey County's public health group back in 2016, and they're in the process of updating this, so we should have even more updated information in the near future. And you can see that the Como neighborhood is one of the lower risk parts of the city overall. It's also notable that nationwide, we are in one of the lower risk parts of the country for climate risks, at least in the short and medium term. Related to that previous map, the city's got this, has a lens of trying to make sure that our climate work is getting benefits to our most vulnerable populations and really thinking about an equitable approach to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to the changing climate. And as part of that work, we created a couple years ago our Climate Justice Advisory Board. It's been up and running for a bit, and the CJAB, as we call it, advises the mayor, council, and us as staff on ways to ensure equitable implementation of our climate work. Related to that, at next month's scheduled CJAB meeting, we're actually in the early stages of planning a bigger kind of public-facing meeting to do what we're calling a stock take around the city's climate work in advance of COP28, which is the big international annual meeting of countries and other parties to talk about climate issues. More details to come on that soon. Some particular areas of interest in our work. Energy burden is the proportion of household income that's used to cover energy costs. And so as we think about those equitable approaches, how are we reducing emissions while also lowering energy bills for those who can least afford to pay those high bills? So a number of programs that are either underway or about to be underway in this area, working with our partners. One that I'll note here, and I won't go through this in detail, Excel was actually instructed by the Public Utilities Commission to go through a process around equitable sustainability. And so the ESAG is the Equitable Sustainability Advisory Group, and we have city representation on that group, making recommendations to Excel that will ultimately go back to the Public Utilities Commission on ways to reduce energy burden. And the idea that seems to be emerging is just a straight discount for income qualified people on their energy bills. Really straightforward idea. Hasn't been put into place before. I mentioned a couple of others earlier, both Buildings Up and Solar for All, where we're looking to partner. Buildings Up, we partnered with the Center for Energy and the Environment, a local kind of clean energy implementation group, as well as the Rondo Community Land Trust on a concept to weatherize, electrify, and add solar where feasible to the 65 homes that the Land Trust owns in and around the Rondo community as sort of a pilot to get some experience with doing that type of work, hopefully more broadly ultimately. And I mentioned Solar for All already. City energy use is another area of work for us. We have a city energy coordinator whose job it is to focus on this area. Her name is Cecilia Govrick. So just some quick accomplishments from 2022 from her work and that team's work. And I'll kind of breeze through here. Some of the things that we're looking forward at, I mentioned that $300,000 allocation. We're actually going to use those funds to do a city buildings decarbonization plan. Our city buildings are, a big source of our sort of municipal operations greenhouse gas emissions. And so thinking about how we're going to move away from fossil fuels in city buildings over time, with some work going on right now, looking at the Como campus in particular, which of course will be of particular interest to you all as neighbors up there. As you may have heard, we got a federal grant via what they used to call the earmark process to install a geothermal system and heat pumps at the Primates building. And we're actually looking at a potential packaging of more than one building for geothermal up at the Como campus. That would see a lot of both greenhouse gas reduction in terms of the operations of those buildings, and also a lot of energy savings. That the campus is on an old steam-based system that's really energy inefficient. There are projects underway that are using geothermal in city facilities or other public buildings that are kind of city adjacent. NECC stands for the North End Community Center under construction right now on Rice Street. The Wakantipi Center is a publicly funded project down here at the Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary. I say down here because I live walking distance from there and I'm sitting at home right now. and possibly the Heights development, which is the new is the redevelopment of the old Hillcrest Golf Course in the northeast corner of the city. Other projects listed here that I won't detail. A few years ago, we implemented an energy benchmarking ordinance that requires all building owners with buildings 50,000 square feet and larger to track their energy and water use in a tool called it's the EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So there were over 600 buildings benchmarked last year. I know we hit that target and a little bit higher actually this year, 91% compliance rate, which is great. The reason this is important is that the energy used in those large buildings represents about 23% of citywide greenhouse gas emissions. So jumping quickly through transportation, and then one or two examples here. I mentioned the EV Spot Network EV car share expansion project, but the sort of first phase project, which is very much launched about a year and a half ago now, pretty quickly became the country's largest electric car share program. And you'll see some more information about that on the next slide. I mentioned we secured that additional funding. There's a update underway to the city's bike plan that hopefully you all have seen and maybe providing some comments on some notable projects that are underway in bike infrastructure right now, particularly the Capital City Bikeway, which is our name for the downtown off-street bike loop that was envisioned years ago. And of course, all the planning around Summit that all of us have been hearing a lot about. And then on the transit side of transportation action, both the Gold Line out along the east I-94 corridor and out into Woodbury is under construction, along with the arterial bus rapid transit project, the B Line, which goes downtown St. Paul to Uptown via Selby and Marshall and Lake Street. The G and H lines have now been funded by the state. Those two are of great note for the D10 community. H line in particular is the future route that will be the Como, Maryland route, and will be that kind of crosstown in the northern part of town route. The G line is the Rice Robert Street route. And that one's an early planning that's just getting started. But with all the additional transit funding from the state, both of those projects, I think, have advanced a little bit in time from what was previously planned. Planning continues for the Riverview corridor and the Purple Line. There's a lot of work and discussion going on around the Rethinking I-94 project of MnDOT, which is determining the future of 94 between the two downtowns. I mentioned the Transportation Safety Action Plan, and one of the kind of current areas of exploration that we're doing with partners is this concept of Bike Share 3.0, which is like, we've had a couple of iterations of bike share now. None of them have really served our community all that well. Can we conceive of maybe a new version that could take advantage of some of these state and federal funding opportunities?
Is the rethinking of 94, is that in conjunction with the work, what is that St. Anthony Park group called? That they want to like
I'll think of it.
level it and add more like graphics and stuff. Transition town. Yeah, is that the same project or is that something different?
So Rethinking I-94 is the name of MnDOT's project for their process to determine what to do with I-94 between the two downtowns. There are a number of groups led by Our Streets Minneapolis that have come up with this concept of a boulevard, meaning essentially take the freeway out and turn it into a more like a parkway. And there are a number of groups kind of lining up support for one position or another. And MnDOT is out in public now with a bunch of different alternative scenarios that they're looking for feedback on. So we're happy to kind of send you that information and link to that process.
Yeah, I was just curious. Thanks.
And sorry for not taking a breath. I was going to try to get through a lot of stuff here. Um, So I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides. This one excites me because this is actually the usage of the new electric car share program over time since its launch, and you can see that it just keeps going up, and we're at the point of 13,000 trips taken in the program last month in September, about 440 per day. And so obviously showing that there is a demand for such a service, which we were confident of, but it's great to see that it's actually getting used. Getting close to the end of my piece here, and I'll turn it over to Anna in a second. Another important area of work is our partnership with Ramsey County and others to think about, with all this change around climate and sustainability, there's going to be a lot of jobs and there's going to be a lot of transitions in job opportunities. And between the city and the county, we both put American Rescue Plan dollars into a number of workforce development programs. One of those areas of focus is what we call construction and green careers, and 2 programs have launched recently in those areas that are underway right now, helping train people for jobs in residential insulation, energy auditing, and related fields. So we're continuing to think about, like, what does that ecosystem of programs need to look like that will pull St. Paul residents and others into these opportunities, many of which are going to be good paying job opportunities as we move forward. All right, I'm ready to start breathing again. And I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to walk you through our new launched in April St. Paul Climate Dashboard, which we think is a great tool for ongoing communication about this work. And I'll stop sharing here.
Thank you, Russ. All right. Let me share my screen. Okay.
Oh, and importantly, sorry, Anna, the Twins
No,
just won their game and won the
Oh,
series.
wow. Yay.
oh, exciting news.
Yeah, well, now that Russ said something, they're gonna lose the next.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Ana de la Torre. I am the sustainability coordinator at the City of St. Paul. I've been at the city for just over a year, first as a Green Corps member and now as a sustainability coordinator. So one of my big projects that I started with as a Green Corps member was working on the dashboard, which I greatly enjoyed because I was able to learn about all of the projects that the city is taking on to fight climate change. And
If you
yeah.
need to Russ. Yeah, if you meet Russ or him, or is it Harry? It might be Harry. There we go. All right.
Thank you. Okay, so here we are at the homepage of the dashboard, just showcasing a bit of our high-level information. So explaining that we created this dashboard to showcase the efforts being undertaken by the city and its partners, going off of the climate action and resilience plan that Russ mentioned earlier. So right away, we have here the community-wide greenhouse gas inventory and our goal of where we want to be, where we are now or in 2020 and where we were in 2017. So you can see that we still have a little ways to go. Well, a ways to go. And then as we scroll down, we give a little more information about the actions that are being showcased on the dashboard. So here we have 47 actions in total, of which 64% or 30 of them are in process, 23% are completed, and 13% are still in the planning process. And of those actions, they're all in different statuses. So some of them are on time, a few of them are late, and 11 of them, or 23% of them, are already completed. So of these 47 actions, we split them up into 6 categories: sustainable transportation, energy use in buildings, green infrastructure and jobs, solid waste, city commitments and rankings, and city buildings and operations. And I'll come back to these categories in just 1 second, but I do want to show here at the bottom, we not only want this dashboard to showcase what the city is doing, but why it's doing what it's doing and how everyone can also participate or make a difference to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So here we have a little explanation that when you click on it, it actually takes you to the Climate Action and Resilience Plan that explains about where greenhouse gas emissions come from in St. Paul. And so as Russ was saying earlier, 42% of emissions come from buildings, commercial, multifamily, or industrial, buildings, travel, waste, or other. And then the same map that Russ was showing earlier, the areas of St. Paul that are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, again, linking back to the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, and then what people can do to reduce their own emissions. So we really wanted this to be transparent and motivate people to take action as well. So we'll scroll all the way back up to the top here where we have more information about the dashboard itself, the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, and a glossary, just a list of terms that might not be known to the average person who doesn't work in climate or sustainability. Then we have the categories, which I showed earlier, and then the actions themselves. So the actions are split up by the categories, and you can see here they're color-coded by their status. So some of them are in process, some of them are completed, and then there are some orange ones down here that are late. So just to show you a few examples of what these actions look like, we will start out with the bike network build out. So each action has a lot of information. First things, it shows the progress of where it's at. So the bike network build out is still in process, but here in the timeline, you can see it's an ongoing project. Some of them have actual end dates and some of them are open, some of them are completed. It shows the responsible department or organization. It explains where in the climate action plan this sits. So yeah, this is part of transportation work. And we have the contact person. We have about 12 key contacts that help out with the dashboard, all of who are professionals in their field. So we have someone in transportation, someone in energy and buildings, and so on. And they are the ones who are updating their actions here and inputting information. So for this one, Jimmy was able to embed this map that shows more details about the bikeways, where there's bike lanes, boulevards, etc. And then inserted more maps as it has developed throughout the years. So we'll go back. And I will go to energy burden tracking, something that Russ was mentioning earlier as well. So again, we have a map here that shows where there is energy burden throughout St. Paul, separated by different years. So you can see how it's changed throughout the years. And then as we continue to scroll down, we have more data, more information, and then at the bottom we have an indicator here. So not all actions have indicators. Let me scroll down, but there are some that do. And so the indicators are just showing more data, more facts and figures. And you can click here on the table to see what the information is. And I don't know why it's scrolling me up.
Just, sorry to interrupt, but very quickly, what is energy burden?
Pardon? Yes, this is energy burden throughout the city.
Sorry, what is energy burden?
Oh, energy burden is the amount, the percentage of the amount that people spend on their energy bills compared to their income. So those who have lower incomes tend to pay or have paid a certain percentage of their income goes to paying their energy bills. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, of course. So our goal is to have it be less than 4%. There were years where it was higher. Yeah, because we, first of all, want to be energy efficient and we don't want people to spend so much on their energy bills. Great. So then moving on to the indicators themselves. So here we have 7 indicators, which, like I said, are the facts, the figures of some of the actions. Yeah. So another thing that Russ was mentioning earlier is the benchmarking of the buildings throughout the years. So when it started in 2019 and as it's has increased throughout the years, and we still have to add the number for this year. But yeah, so having all of that information on here gives us an opportunity to show everyone what the city is all the actions the city is taking. And let me see if I can, okay. So going back to the categories real quick. So each category will explain a little bit about the category. So for example, transportation sector accounts for 31% of greenhouse gases emissions in St. Paul. And to learn more, we give a little bit more background in the framework. We have the city goals explained, and then this one's a long one at the bottom, how you can take action and reduce your emissions. So hoping that people not only see what the city is doing, but also motivates them to take action themselves. And that is the dashboard. Are there any questions, comments, concerns?
I have a couple of questions. My name is Jacob. So I just noted, kind of 2 questions. So just on the dashboard here, the goal is carbon neutrality in city ops by 2030 and citywide by 2050. I guess my first question is, what's the difference in being carbon neutral in city operations versus citywide? And are there any plans to move up the citywide goal to sooner than 2050?
I can take that one. So city operations is literally, city workers, city buildings, city fleet. So the ways in which the city as an operator is directly responsible for burning fossil fuels and creating those emissions. Community-wide is all buildings, all vehicles, all sources of emissions essentially that happen within St. Paul. And so that's the distinction there. We are definitely not on track to get to net zero in city operations by 2030, although we are making some exciting progress. And I would say we are closer to on track to net zero by 2050 in terms of some of the progress shown in the graph here right on the front page. Although we suspect that there's a little bit of the pandemic coming into play in these 2020 numbers, with people moving around less and certainly some of the office buildings clearing out and using less energy that year. So we'll see as we start to, we're just finalizing some of the data from 2021 and we'll kind of see what that trend looks like. And then your second question, I lost track of, sorry.
No, I think you answered it, but so with the citywide by 2050 goal, would that be more like incentives or punishments to businesses or individuals, or would that be more legislative action or?
It's a great question. I mean, it's like all the things that are needed to do for us to stop using fossil fuels, right? And some of those tools the city has in its toolbox, some of them clearly have to be done at other levels of government and in other ways, right? And so almost everything that we do here is partnerships. One of the things that most clearly in our control is those city operations, right? And so in a way that's probably actually the measurement that people should be asking us about most directly. How are we doing? And we're getting better at tracking that. But yeah, for us to get to net zero by 2050, it's gonna take a lot of change across the board in the ways that we use energy. And the relatively easy stuff, while not easy, is the transition of electricity to clean electricity. That's already underway. It's on a good trajectory. There's a new state law that says all electricity in the state has to be carbon neutral by 2040. Xcel's on board with that as our utility. Harder is the way that we heat buildings and the way that we move around town and those transitions. And so in some ways, our climate action plan focuses more on those two areas because the electricity side is already a little bit on the trajectory that it needs to be on.
Thank you.
Well, we should move on because we have to end our meeting at 7. Well, thank you for coming, Russ and Anna. Sorry.
7:15 we have to end, but there are a couple of agenda items we still need to cover.
So thank you for sharing. It's hard to feel hopeful sometimes in environmental work, but it's really nice to see some of the progress or the things that are happening all together in that dashboard and all those things. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Yes, and thank both of you too for joining us off your standard hours and educating ourselves online and in the room here and those in our community that see the video.
Thank you for your patience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and thank you for your patience.
Glad to do it.
You too, Harry and Mike, and Anna and Russ, you're welcome to stay for the